This story happened to me several years ago and still traumatizes me to an extent every time I think about it. But sometimes I find it therapeutic to talk about it, which I know sounds like a contradiction. I just want to warn that it may be a little triggering for some people, but here goes. It was a normal day. I finally stepped through the front door of my apartment. It had been a long day at work, and I was exhausted, to say the least. I was excited to see my dog and my boyfriend, who we will call Mark. When I walked into the apartment, I noticed that my dog was barking uncontrollably. He definitely wasn't acting like himself, and something felt a little off from the moment I came through the door. The apartment was dimly lit, with the only lighting coming through the curtains from the streetlights. I expected to find my boyfriend, Mark, lounging on the couch playing video games as usual. We had our routines, our shared spaces, and coming home to his presence was a comforting constant in my life. But as I stepped further into our small living room, my heart dropped to my stomach. In that moment, I felt like time had stopped and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There, sprawled across our once cozy couch, was Mark, lifeless, his body laid limp in an unnatural position. I let out a loud scream as I stumbled backward. I closed my eyes and reopened them, hoping that I was dreaming, but I wasn't. The horrific scene was very much real and very much traumatizing. I finally got enough energy to pick up my dog before running out of the apartment. When I ran into the hallway, our next door neighbor was standing in front of our door asking me if everything was all right. I couldn't find the right words to explain what I had seen. Somehow, she knew that something was terribly wrong, and she reached for her phone to dial 911. The phone was on speaker, and I could hear the operator's voice. She sounded like an older woman who was grumpy and impatient. She seemed frustrated because I could barely speak, and my neighbor didn't know exactly what was wrong. I grabbed the phone and told them that my boyfriend was dead. That's when her tone changed a little bit, but she still asked me questions that I didn't have the answer to. She held the line until the police showed up on the scene. 2 of the officers went into the apartment while one of them asked me the same questions the operator had asked. I could barely process their words and didn't really have all the answers, but I walked the police through my entire day from the moment I woke up to the moment leading up to me discovering the love of my life lying there lifelessly. They asked me to come down to the station and give an official statement, and I agreed to go, of course. I was willing to do anything that would help the police figure out what happened to Mark. I said goodbye to my neighbor who had waited around in the distance while the police questioned me. When I got to the police station, I was placed in a cold room that was well lit. The lights were hurting my eyes and the temperature of the room offered no comfort. I sat in the room for what felt like an eternity, but maybe was only about 20 minutes in reality. Finally, the 2 detectives walked in and greeted me with handshakes. One was a woman with short blonde hair. She wore a gray suit that fit her body tightly. The other detective was an older man with a bald head. He wore a black suit with a white shirt. He looked like the more serious of the 2, and the eye contact he made with me was intense. The woman offered me coffee, which I gladly accepted because, like I said, it was cold in that room. While she went to grab the coffee, the man introduced himself to me again and told me that they just wanted to ask me a few questions to determine what happened to Mark. He wanted me to walk him through my entire day leading up to the moment that I discovered Mark's body in our living room. It was pretty much the same thing the responding officers had asked me to do, but a little more detailed. The female detective finally came back into the interrogation room right before I began speaking. I started by telling them about how Mark and I woke up at about 6:15 that morning. We went for our daily 3-mile jog with our dog, which took about 30 minutes. After our jog, we returned home and had breakfast together. Mark had logged onto his computer at about 9 o'clock to begin his work day when I got a call from my manager at work asking me if I would like to pick up an extra shift on my day off. I reluctantly agreed after being reminded by Mark that we needed the extra money for our upcoming vacation to Cabo in a few weeks. I left home at about 10:30 to make it on time for my 11 o'clock shift. I kissed Mark and our dog goodbye before leaving for work. When I left, everything was normal, I told the detectives. They wanted to know if Mark and I had argued that morning or the night before. Of course not. When I left home that day, we were on very good terms and looking forward to the start of our weekend. The male detective kept asking me if I was sure things were fine and wanted to know if either Mark or I had been under any stress lately. I thought at the time it was a strange question, which later made sense. I explained to him that like any other couple, we had our stressful moments, but we worked really well together to overcome those moments. The questioning continued, and they wanted to know more about Mark and his lifestyle. I explained that Mark was a simple guy who lived what most people would consider a very boring life. He worked from home as a data analyst for a financial services firm. On weekends, he liked to go hiking, cycling, and swimming. He enjoyed spending time with his family and close friends when he wasn't at home with me and our sweet fur baby. They wanted me to elaborate on the people in Mark's social circle and asked me for a list of his close relatives and friends, which I gladly offered up. They asked me if he had any known enemies or anyone I thought would want to hurt Mark. Of course not. Mark was loved by everyone who knew him, and I couldn't think of anyone who would want to harm him. They kept pressing me for answers, but the truth was, I had no answers to offer them. I had been at work when the unimaginable had occurred, and my alibi was airtight. The frustration and helplessness was getting to me. It was a bitter reminder of how little I knew. Before wrapping up the interview, they asked me for my manager's number so they could follow up on whether I was actually at work. I assured them I was at work the entire time until my shift had ended. I was a little offended because I had in fact been at work and was sure my manager would tell them that. I wasn't allowed back into the apartment that night because it had been marked a crime scene. I called my parents, who picked me up from the police station. I stayed at their place that night, and in the days that followed, I had taken off from work and decided to spend some time to grieve the loss of my soulmate. There was no way I could return to work in the state I was in. How could I care for sick patients before taking care of myself? As the days passed, the investigation unfolded. The details were agonizingly slow to emerge. Each piece of information felt like a shard of glass in the mosaic of Mark's murder. The police had questioned me extensively, and their eyes probing for any hint of involvement. In that instant, I felt the weight of the world crashing down upon me. It was my day off from work, a rare oasis of relaxation in my demanding schedule, and yet I had been called in for an extra shift. If not for that twist of fate, that cruel hand of destiny, I might have been the one to walk into the path of violence. A few days after Mark's murder, I received a phone call from detectives who wanted to speak with me again. Finally, I thought, they found out who had committed this horrific act against Mark. I nervously walked into the police station, not knowing if I was ready to receive whatever news they were going to deliver. I was greeted by the two detectives who had questioned me the day of the murder. This time they were a little less friendly and a lot more serious. This time, the female detective spoke. She told me that they had made contact with my manager, who confirmed that I was at work that day. I was relieved, even though I knew that it was the truth. That wasn't all though. My manager told them that I had left work that day for about a half hour. The detective asked me why I hadn't mentioned to them that I had left work during that time. In that moment, I immediately recalled leaving work that day. I couldn't believe I had forgotten such a small yet huge detail. On the day of the incident, I remembered leaving work to go to a local coffee shop for an iced coffee to help me stay awake during my shift. I explained that to the officers, confident that they would understand, but I was wrong. They kept questioning me about why I didn't just drink the coffee at work and why I would lie about my whereabouts that day. They were making me feel as if going to a coffee shop to buy my favorite drink was a crime. I wish I hadn't left work at all that day if I knew leaving work would lead up to this moment. They asked me for the name of the coffee shop, which I provided, and they asked me if I had a receipt, which I didn't have. The interview, or should I say interrogation, ended pretty quickly before I left to return to my parents' house. That night, I told my parents about my experience at the police station, and they assured me that the detectives were just doing their job to find out what happened to Mark and that everything was going to be okay. The talk with my parents made me feel better. I had nothing to worry about after all. I was confident that the detectives would do their investigation and find that I was telling the truth. The following day, I was called to come back to the police station, and when I showed up, I was greeted by the detectives yet again. This time, only the female detective met with me in the interrogation room though. She told me that her and her partner had obtained video surveillance of me at the coffee shop that day and said that the video showed me only being there for a total of 3 minutes. She said that they also drove from my job to the coffee shop, which was less than 3 minutes round trip. She wanted me to account for the remaining 24 minutes, which in her opinion was more than enough time for me to make a 7-minute ride home, carry out the despicable act of murdering Mark, and returning to work. I was shocked. I couldn't believe they thought that I was the suspect in their case. I asked them what made them suspect me. I had to know what made them think I was a killer. The detective told me that they found text messages in Mark's cell phone between him and another woman who we will call Christina. Apparently, Mark was having an affair with Christina and told her that if I found out about the two of them, I would kill him. The news that Mark was cheating on me was like a punch to the gut. As if the pain of me losing my life partner wasn't enough, the news I just received sent me into an emotional tailspin. I'm not sure what happened next, but I remember asking for an attorney, which brought the interrogation to an end. I walked out of the police station feeling lifeless. I couldn't help but wonder who the heck Christina was and if she had been subjected to the same line of questioning that I was. They told me I was free to go, and that is what I did. I left the police station and back to the lobby where my parents waited for me this time. My father could see the disappointment on my face as I ran into his arms. We left the police station quickly, and I waited until we got home to give them the details of my most recent interview with the police. They quickly called a family friend who was also a lawyer. After detailing everything to my lawyer, he determined that the police didn't have any hard evidence against me, otherwise I would have been arrested. He did say that at that moment I was being considered a person of interest, so we needed to have a solid defense. Like everyone else, he wanted to know the details of that horrendous day. In particular, he wanted to know about my whereabouts during my coffee break from work. He assured me that he believed me but needed to cover all of our bases. While I was detailing my whereabouts during my coffee break, I recalled that the traffic back to my job that day had been particularly heavy due to a truck being stuck under an overpass. This had caused heavy delays in traffic, which caused me to have to find another route back to work, which is what took me so long to return. A few days and phone calls later, my lawyer found the proof we needed to clear me of any suspicion. He was able to not only find video surveillance of the truck that was stuck, but of my car waiting in traffic for more than 10 minutes before making a U-turn. He was also able to find video footage from a few business places that I drove by that proved that I had been driving towards my job during the time Mark was being murdered. Armed with this new information, my lawyer reached out to the detectives to set up a meeting to present them with the evidence. I wasn't present for that meeting, but my lawyer did relay to me that the detectives agreed that I couldn't have committed the crime but maintained that they were doing their job. A few weeks after I was cleared as a person of interest, the detectives were finally able to figure out who murdered Mark. When I found out that Christina was the one who had ended his life, I was shocked. It turns out that she had been bugging Mark to end his relationship with me, and when that didn't happen, she decided to take matters into her hand. She had decided that if she couldn't have him, no one could. The motive behind Mark's murder was a revelation that sent shockwaves through my already fragile world. He had been cheating on me, entangled in a web of deceit and betrayal. The pain of his betrayal was still too fresh, too raw. But what mattered now was the knowledge that his infidelity had triggered a chain reaction, a violent outburst from the person he had wronged. The revelation brought a strange mix of emotions: anger at Mark for his betrayal, guilt for the relief I felt at my own narrow escape, and an overwhelming sadness for the life that had been snuffed out so brutally. The person responsible for Mark's murder was finally brought to justice. Her actions were the horrifying consequence of jealousy and rage. As I sat in the courtroom, watching the case unfold, I felt like a stranger in my own life. The memories of our shared moments, the love we had once nurtured, had been tainted by the revelation of his infidelity and the violence it had ignited. In the end, justice was served, but it offered little solace for the void that Mark's absence had left in my life. The courtroom dramas and legal proceedings felt like a distant echo, a reminder of the breach of trust and the unpredictable twists of fate. Eventually, I was able to return to the apartment that had once been our shared sanctuary became a place haunted by memories. The love and laughter we had once known had been overshadowed by the darkness of his secrets. The apartment that had once been our home now stood as a silent witness to a love that had been both beautiful and flawed. In the end, I learned that life was unpredictable and to be careful who I gave my trust to. I moved out of the apartment, never spending another night in that place, and eventually moved on with my life.